One of the best gifts that we can give to someone else in life is to make them feel heard, make them feel seen. And now we have an actual method to show them that we were truly listening to them. So what's going on, guys? How's it going? My name is PJ. I hope you're all doing great. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be reviewing and talking about the book Supercommunicators by Charles Duhigg. I recently read this book as it was one of the bestsellers on Audible for a while, and obviously the topic of communications is one of those topics that causes us some of the most headaches, causes us some of the best joys, causes us, it brings about the whole spectrum of human experience. And when we master our communication and master our connection building skill with people, which is through communication most of the time, we basically unlock one of the keys to life, one of the keys to having a great life. So when I saw the title of this book about becoming a super communicator, it truly would be a superpower to have. Like, imagine if a genie showed up and asked you, hey, you get like a wish to have a superpower, and you ask the power of being a super communicator, then I feel like that would unlock so many things in life to you, so many successes and so many things that you would want and want to experience in life and want to have, like, would be unlocked to you if you were a master communicator per se. So today we're going to start this video by basically the last sentence of this book, because I really feel like this last sentence of this book encapsulates the why we want to even become a super communicator. And personally, if I was Charles Duhigg, which I'm not, I would have started the book with this sentence, because I do believe it gives us the foresight as to why we even want to become a super communicator. So here it goes. The sentence that the book ends with is this: achieving authentic, meaningful connection is the most important thing in life. So that is the sentence that basically Charles Duhigg ends the book with, and it's his premise as to why he wrote the book in the first place, because achieving authentic, meaningful connection, he believes is the most important thing in life, and it truly is the most important thing in life, as scientifically proven. So basically, one of the studies that he cites in this book is a study by, I believe, Harvard University, and it was apparently the longest study ever conducted in human history, ever scientific experiment. And basically, they monitored, I believe, like a 50 or 100 people over the course of like 50 years, and they monitored like their successes, their well-being, their health, all these different criteria. And the goal of the study was to figure out what leads to the best life possible. Like, what are the things that if people live by, they have the best, most fruitful life. And the thing that, spoiler alert about this study, is that the main criteria that led to, basically was a correlated component to a happy and great life, was people who had great relationships. And so in this quote that I just read, where it says connection, that word connection, what leads to the best connections, and again, going back to how that's correlated to living and having the best life, those connections, those relationships, what leads to having great connections is great communication. So that quote that said, achieving authentic, meaningful connection is the most important thing in life. And what leads to us having and experiencing that most important thing in life, which is connection, it's great communication, and really becoming a super communicator and having great communication skills so that we can have those authentic, meaningful connections in our life. So that's kind of the last sentence in this book. And like with all book reviews, aka book summaries that I make, they're really just my key takeaways. If I were to put the whole book into this video, that would take way longer, and it's really not my mission here. My mission is to share with you my key takeaways and the parts that stood out to me, because I felt like, if a part of the book really resonated with me, it's probably going to resonate with other people. And so I'll be sharing with you my main key takeaways from the book Supercommunicators by Charles Duhigg. So here they go. Okay, so one of the main points that the author keeps hammering and keeps reiterating in this entire book is this topic of understanding what a conversation is about. So basically, he makes the point that super communicators really understand what the conversation is about, meaning that are we having a conversation, and then he breaks it down into like what types of, which he identifies two main types of conversations that we have in life. Basically, the super communicators in this book that he highlights and studies and shares their wisdom, basically, they are really good at identifying what a conversation is about. Is this conversation about, now we're going into those two types of conversation types or categories that the author identifies, which type 1 of conversations are conversations that are empathetic conversations / compassionate conversations / story-oriented conversations / narrative. So this is more like, the way I see it is more like a flowy conversation. It's not like a clear-cut, like scientific, straight to the point kind of conversation that you may have, let's say, with your boss at work. This is not that. This may be a conversation you have with a friend in a time of need, or just in a casual time of connecting with a friend, where you might share like stories and be empathetic to what your friend is sharing, and be compassionate and use narratives. So that's one type of conversation. So again, going back to the point of one of the most important conversations that we need to have is the conversation of what is this conversation about. Super communicators are great at identifying, is this conversation either A, that first type of conversation I just spoke about, the empathetic / compassionate / story-oriented conversation, is it one of those? Or now type 2, the second type of conversation type that Charles Duhigg identifies, is conversations that are about facts, that are practical, that are about analysis, and that are about reasoning. So those are the two types of conversations. First type, a conversation that's about empathy / compassion / stories / narratives. That's one type. The second type of conversation is the more clear-cut, straight to the point conversation, which is about facts, practical things, analysis / reasoning. So the two types of conversations, and I'll show you this real quick from my outline. Basically, if I can fold this. So as you see, we have conversations that are about empathy, compassion, stories, narratives, and we have conversations that are about facts or practical things or analysis or reasoning. So this is little section from my outline. So now, as you saw in my outline there, those are kind of the two buckets, or the two categories, the two main categories of the types of conversations that we have. And most often, super communicators can quickly identify, and then I'll share about how they identify what a conversation is about. They're really good at identifying what is this conversation about. And so meaning that, like, if a conversation is one that requires empathy, requires maybe compassion, understanding from like an emotional place, it requires like storytelling, or a conversation that's about narratives, they're good at identifying if a conversation is about that, or is it a conversation that's about facts and analysis and reasoning and more like clear cut, straight to the point. So basically, one of the points that Charles Duhigg makes is like, if you are having a conversation with your boss and they're just like, hey, what are the sales numbers this week? What is our return on ad spend this past week? What is, so on and so forth. They are trying to get clear cut, straight to the point facts. And personally, I've made this mistake where I don't identify what a conversation is about, let's say, quickly, or used to back in the day, especially when I had first started my career, in my job. And, I may go on a tangent versus like quickly and clear, basically clear cut and straight to the point, give my boss the answer. Like, the numbers was this, that were this, and then this is our ROAS, et cetera, et cetera. And you could tell like people are checking out a little bit, or zoning out, or like, or trying to wrap up the conversation. Because if you're not quick at identifying what a conversation is about, and you think it's one that is about, let's say, storytelling or narratives and empathy and compassion, but it's really one that requires facts and analysis and reasoning and clear cut, like scientific, almost like, straight to the point kind of conversation, and requires reasoning, then if you mistake those, then people might check out, or the connection might not become deeper or as deep as it could be when you do identify the type of conversation. So super communicators are great at identifying what the conversation is about. And if one requires empathy, they're empathetic and connect on an empathetic level. And If a conversation is about facts and reasoning, they're quick at identifying that and they give the data, go straight to the point, and make the conversation short and sweet and be about reasoning and analysis as it should be. So they're great at identifying that, and then they're great at changing their approach to what the conversation requires at that moment. So now I'm going to kind of put these two types of conversations into my own languaging. So basically, I love the concept of yin and yang. I do a practice called Qigong, which is basically Chinese medicine, and it's similar to Tai Chi. And in Qigong or in any sort of martial arts, they really talk about the concept of yin and yang. You can say the feminine or the masculine, the light and the dark, these dualities of life. So to me, to kind of summarize, or at least in a way for me to understand what Charles Duhigg is saying and put it into my own words, is that conversations are either yin conversations, which is let's say the more emotional or feminine perspective, or more in this language is the more empathetic, compassionate story or narrative-based conversations. That's the yin side of the conversations, or the yang or yang conversations, which are the more facts-based, practical, analysis-oriented, and reasoning-oriented type of conversations. So the type of conversations are either yin or yang, and the more quickly you can identify what a conversation is about, what type of conversation we're having, is it yin or yang, the better of a communicator you become. Now, this segues us very nicely into how the heck do you even identify what a conversation is about, what type of conversation we're having. So Charles Duhigg identifies two primary ways to identify what a conversation is about. Basically, how to have that what is a conversation about conversation. And those two ways for us to discover what a conversation is about are through A, questions, or one, questions, and two, clues. So clues are when basically clues have to do a lot with like body language or people saying, like making those audible kind of gestures in a conversation. And basically clues are when you pick up on, you've probably had this interaction where you're talking to a friend, or you're talking to someone, and you ask them, how you're doing, and they say like, fine. But like, if you are a super communicator, if you're good at communicating, you will pick up on that subtle clue of like, fine, like that little shoulder shrug or whatever that physical body language clue is of like, hey, this person actually is maybe wanting to have a conversation that's more like how are you really feeling? Like maybe it's that clue that they're putting out is a clue of like, hey, a story-based or empathetic, compassionate conversation may be one that is required or that person is desiring at that point. So that's like a clue type of way of figuring out, okay, what type of conversation, what is this conversation about, or what type of conversation we want to have or we're having right now. So that's the clue way. The other way I mentioned, which is through questions, is basically you just ask questions like, hey, like pretty much like straight up you ask like, hey, what type of conversation do you want to have right now? Do you want to just, talk about the facts and the analysis based, the reasoning based side of this conversation, or do you want to talk about your feelings? Like, how do you feel about this? Let's say when you go to a therapist, let's say they might want to focus on the empathetic side, right? But even a therapist might ask you like, hey, do you want to just tell me the facts of the situation, or do you want to tell me about how you feel about the situation? And then through that, you define and you figure out what type of conversation we're having and want to have. So Charles Duhigg does go to say that asking questions is the better way. And also the question doesn't directly even have to be that, but it could be just asking different questions. Like, okay, so let's say someone says a situation and then you ask them like, okay, so like, how did that make you feel? And then you see and you feel out whether or not they were like excited to share about their feeling or versus they just want to stick more to the facts of the situation. They're not really trying to have the more yin type of conversation in this instance. However, Charles Duhigg does go to say and mention in the book that asking questions is the better way at identifying what is this conversation about than necessarily trying to pick up on the gestures and the nods and the signs that and the clues that someone is putting off and putting out via their physical body language, verbal cues. So that's just a point to keep in mind. So now, when it comes to questions, the author does have a point or a little tip about asking great questions and how we can ask great questions. So I'll just read that for you guys off of my outline, and basically it's from a segment of the book regarding asking good questions. So here it goes. Okay, so here's some tips and advice that Charles Duhigg gives in Supercommunicators about asking great questions. So I found this very helpful, so I'll share this segment with you guys as well from the book. So he mentions that, ask others, and these are all like bullet points. So I'm going to go, one by one. So bullet point 1, ask others about their beliefs and values. Another one is inquire about experiences and moments that cause them to change. Another one is focus on how they feel rather than just facts. And this is good. The one I just mentioned is especially if you realize that we're having an empathy-based / compassion-based type of conversation. And another type of conversation that he mentions in the book is how do we feel conversation. And that's really like, once you've identified that this is the more like yin type of conversation, then that's a conversation that you can have. Like, how do we feel conversation? So the question on focus on how they feel rather than just facts is great when you know that you're having a yin type of conversation. Another one is reframe your questions to be deeper. Another one is ask follow-up questions. So this is great because I kind of sucked at that initially, and I had to work on this. And I did notice like basically the way I would go about it is someone would say something, and instead of me asking a follow-up question, I would just like share a story from my life that's relevant to that. But like sometimes people just want you to ask a follow-up question, and that's something that fosters a deeper connection than you just necessarily jumping into your story without asking them follow-up questions. So ask follow-up questions is another advice that Charles Duhigg gives. Another one is, and as people expose their vulnerabilities, reveal something about yourself. So this goes back to my last point, like, what I just said about I would go to my own story. Like, don't yet do that per se until someone has exposed the vulnerability of theirs, or, they were vulnerable with you, so they gave, so you give something back. It's like an exchange. Like, if they are going to be vulnerable with you, you be vulnerable with them. And if they expose the vulnerability of theirs, reveal something about yourself. And that helps people trust each other more and build a deeper connection. Okay, so this point that I'm about to make, these few next points are all about the last point, which was, and as people expose their vulnerabilities, reveal something about yourself. What Charles Duhigg says about that is, it will be less uncomfortable than you imagine, and it will be more fascinating than you think, and it might lead to a moment of true connection. So that is something that he says about the point, and as people expose their vulnerabilities, reveal something about yourself. Now, moving on to the next part of the book, and this is absolutely hands down the most important takeaway of this and from this book, Supercommunicators by Charles Duhigg, for me personally. This was absolutely hands down, like not even close in terms of how important and helpful this was for me than any other point mentioned in the book. Not that the other points are not valuable, but this just hit me like a ton of bricks, because personally, if I just implement this, it would be so helpful in my life. So let's start by saying that basically one of the things that really fosters connections in life and in communication is when people genuinely believe that truly trust and believe that we are listening to them. So how do you prove to someone basically that you're listening to them? Because it's more than just saying, yeah. Like it's more than that to actually prove, for someone to genuinely believe that we are listening to them. So this tactic or this method, this 3-step method that Charles Duhigg mentions in this part of the book, this is how to prove to someone that you are listening to them. So here it goes. This is how the method works. And again, this is the most important part of the book and the most helpful part of the book for me. And I believe it'll be probably very helpful for you as well. So the method goes as this. Once someone is done speaking, do the following 3 steps. A, ask more questions. So someone just got done talking. Hey, the other day I went to the store and someone said something that really hurt my feelings. Okay, ask questions. What did they say? Why did that make you feel that way? What did you do? Like, ask questions so that people know you're engaged, because otherwise, like, if you don't ask questions, it'd be like, okay, cool. Like, you might have not even listened at all to what they said. And I've personally experienced that myself, people doing that to me. And it just leaves you with a bad feeling, because it's like, wow, that person completely like ignored me. It makes you feel not seen and not heard, which doesn't feel good for anyone. So ask questions. That's step 1 in this method. And again, all of these happen after and once someone's done speaking. Now, second, summarize what you've heard. But, and this is a very, very important point about summarizing what you've heard, paraphrase and do it in your own words. And this is very, very important. You don't want to just summarize what they just said, like ChatGPT, verbatim what they said. So you said like exactly what they said. No, you want to, and again, this is a very important point, summarize what you've heard or paraphrase what you've heard in your own words. So basically, like, let's share what I just said, right? So if someone's listening to that and they want to do this second part of this method, which is summarize what you've heard in your own words, they might say, so let me see if I understand what you just said correctly. So you're saying that you want to make sure that when, let's say, you or someone's done speaking, you want to make sure that you ask follow-up questions. Did I get that correctly? So that is a way to, let's say, paraphrase what someone said in your own words. Now, I don't know if I did a great job at that already, because I'm still in the learning process of this, but you want to paraphrase it in your own words. You don't want to like verbatim, like a parrot, repeat what they said. You want to kind of repeat and paraphrase what you got from what they said, or paraphrase it in your own words. So that really shows someone that you're listening to them. And again, the most important thing about that is to do it in your own words. So moving on to the third and the last step in this method of how to prove to someone that you are listening to them is ask if you got it right. So actually, I think I did that in my example. I just did the third step kind of like accidentally and automatically, but ask so when you summarize what you've heard them say, what you've heard, and you paraphrase that in your own words and summarize it in your own words, ask if you got it right. So, let's say I'm done paraphrasing what I believe someone said in my own words. Then I say, did I get that right? Is that what you meant as well? I just want to make sure I got that and I understood that correctly. And when I think about in my life and super communicators, now that I have that term for them, super communicators that I've met in my life, they all do this. I just feel like genuinely and automatically, maybe just someone who is a naturally great communicator, they just do this naturally. Like when I think about my grandpa, for example, who was a great communicator, he's passed away, but even as a kid, like when I was 6 years old or whatever, when I would hang out with him, I feel like he did this where even, I'm a little 6-year-old kid just, saying random stories, but he still made me feel super heard. That's why to this day, like, he's one of the most important figures in my life, is because I genuinely felt hurt in his presence, because I feel like he asked me more questions about what I just said, even though I just said like, hey, I had a dream about dinosaurs and like, he would be curious enough to ask questions. And then he would summarize, oh, so like your dream was about this, right? So he would summarize it in his own words and then ask if he got it right. Is that correct? Is that what you meant? Is that how it was? So even as a little kid, I felt super heard and super valued and felt that he's super present with me. And I believe that this is truly one of the best gifts that we can give to someone else in life, is to make him feel heard, make them feel seen, and make them feel valued, and make them feel that we were genuinely present with them. And this method, and that's why I said this is the most and was the most helpful part of this book, Supercommunicators by Charles Duhigg, for me, is because it gives us a method to do this, literally a method to foster true connections. Because one of the things that fosters true connection is when people genuinely believe that we were listening to them, And now we have an actual method. How cool is that? An actual method to show them that we were truly listening to them. So you literally have a key to foster connection in your hands. To me, this was the coolest, most important part of the book. And if you or I literally got nothing else from the book, which there was a ton more to get from the book, but if you literally don't get anything else from this video or from this book, those 3 steps, that 3-step method and that process to prove to someone and show someone that we're genuinely listening to them, that alone is worth the price of the book. So that's it for that method. Now let's move on to the last section of the book, or my last main takeaway from the book and the last section of the video. Okay, so the last section of the book, this book was written really like in a secular, going back to like, what is this conversation about? Like, he approaches it from a very secular and necessarily spiritual or metaphysical or anything like that. He approaches it from a very like clear-cut scientific way, and I feel like that's just how he like thinks about stuff, like very scientific, clear-cut way. And if you were to say, what is this conversation about, this book is about, very much it's facts-based and analysis-based and reasoning-based, and that kind of way of approaching it is very secular, let's say, in its languaging. However, there was this section in the book that, for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, they might see a spiritual insight in this last section of this book. So basically, the author, one thing that he was talking about, and again, like I said, this was written in a very secular way, but I personally got spiritual insight from it, and I could see like parallels from this very secular understanding or very scientific understanding. I could see spiritual parallels to it, and I like to think of it spiritually because as you probably see on my YouTube channel, on my other videos, I like spirituality. I like thinking about spiritual stuff and reading spiritual books and those kind of things. And so I kind of made this, even though it was in secular terms, I kind of made it in spiritual terms, and that's what just resonates to me more and what I like more. So the point that Charles Duhigg was making in this last section of the book was about, basically, if you don't make your identity bigger than one thing, then the chances of you being insecure and not being able to like really build good connections, I feel like, is a lot higher. So basically the point he was making is like, if you only see your identity as like a certain race, like I'm just gonna mention mine, like I am Persian, and I'm Iranian/Persian, like that, and that becomes like your entire identity. Or I'm a male, and that becomes your entire identity. Or I am a millennial, whatever that may be, like that, and that becomes your entire identity. Then the chances are, and this was like scientifically proven, where basically they would like highlight someone's like one aspect of their personality that like they identify with the most, and then like they would say something. I forgot how how this study was exactly conducted, but they would say something that would like, and this was like done prior to people taking a test, like an ACT or SAT type of test. They would like say something that would make them feel less confident about, like they would say something maybe like disrespectful or mean or not kind per se about a certain aspect of people's identity. So like, let's say if everyone in a group was a woman, then they might say something demeaning about women, and then through that they would like basically reduce the average ACT point of that same group of people, versus when they didn't say anything about that. So like the same people taking the same test heard something demeaning about an aspect of their identity that they identified as, and the scores went down. Whereas the same group in the same test, when they did it without someone making a bad comment about that aspect of their identity, scores were great. There was no decrease in that. So basically it reduced people's confidence. And the danger, basically what Charles Duhigg was saying, is like the danger in us identifying way too much with one aspect of our identity. Like if I really, really identified with the aspect that I'm a millennial 30-year-old, whatever, let's say, and I was just super wrapped up and attached to that, and I didn't make myself more multi-dimensional, where I'm not just a 30-year-old millennial. I'm also a man. I'm also Persian. I'm also, although like U.S. citizen, but, Persian, let's say, Iran is where was born, or whatever other aspects I find, or I'm a man, or whatever it might be, if I just limit myself too much to one and don't make myself a multi-dimensional, multifaceted type of person and make my identity bigger than just one criteria, then the chances of me becoming insecure in the face of someone disrespecting that is a lot higher. Because if I'm all about, oh, I'm Persian, and someone says something bad about a Persian, then I'm like, oh, like, I'm just like shaken up internally. But I'm like, if I'm bigger than that, if I'm not just that, and I'm a bunch of other identities, and my personality is multifaceted and multidimensional, then I'm like, oh, whatever. It doesn't bother me as much. So kind of like, to put it in Jesus's term in a way, is like, my identity is not built on a foundation of sand, and instead it's built on a foundation of rock, a solid foundation. And when you just build it on one identity criteria, one facet of you, and your whole life becomes on that, then the chances of you actually becoming insecure and not actually being able to build good connections and foster good, meaningful relationships goes a lot higher. So now, how does this become spiritual? And that's how I saw it. So basically, there's this concept in spirituality, or in different spiritual traditions, but like, when you start getting into spirituality or start thinking and seeing the world through a spiritual lens versus just a purely physical lens, and a purely material lens, you have this sense of you might hear this saying that I am a spiritual being having a physical experience. So I'm not just this physical human experience. No, I'm actually a spiritual being having a physical experience. So when it goes back to identity, and the way this became spiritual to me, is that the only identity I've found in my life to not be a shaky foundation is one that is eternal and is non-changing. And the only thing that's non-changing and eternal is our spirit, or that's how I see it. Or another way, in, let's say, mystical, spiritual Christian mystical traditions, they might say that's the Christ itself. In Buddhism, they might say that's the Buddha self. And different traditions have different words for that essential, eternal spirit that is shared by all. It's just the same spirit. It's like the same light going through a prism and then breaking into multiple different lights, but it's the same source. Like, that same spirit, that identity of us as that eternal, essential spirit, that true self, that Christ itself, the Christ, let's say, if you want to follow that languaging, such as the languaging in A Course in Miracles, which is a spiritual book I really like, or other Christian spiritual traditions, or other traditions such as Buddhism, that Buddha self, that Christ itself, that Buddha within, that Christ within, that is the essential eternal identity of ours that never changes. So the way that this part of the book became spiritual for me is that if you don't base your identity in anything other than you are spirit, or you are essentially, eternally, internally, you are that Christ itself, that Buddha within. A lot of times they say Jesus. And again, if you don't resonate with any of this stuff, this part of the video, that's totally fine. But this is how I started seeing it from a spiritual lens, because I like to think about stuff through that lens. But nonetheless, like, sometimes they say in certain Christian languaging or speaking, or, the more mystical side of Christianity, they say Jesus who was the Christ. So that is a man who was a physical human being who identified with the aspect of himself, aspect of his being, that was the biggest / most eternal aspect of his identity. That's an aspect of all of our identities. He was one who identified fully and completely with the Christ within, with that essential eternal spirit within, and nothing else. Basically, another way to put it is like, if you look at life as like a dream and as like an illusion, that a lot of us are trapped in this illusion, this matrix, he was the one who had the awareness of dreaming while in the dream. And that's like the highest level that you can reach, where you see the truth completely without waning in that, and without loosening your clarity in that, and you stay completely laser focused, clear about the truth of life, and have that awareness of dreaming. And I believe he had that. And that is a potentiality within all of us to identify and become one with that Christ within, such as Jesus, who was the Christ and who said, everything I did, you can do the same and even greater things than this. Like, he was trying to point us to that identity, that essential identity, that we can identify ourselves with that and become that. And that is the only unshaky foundation in life, that spirit, that essence of us. And everything else, because it's based in the world of change, changes. However, that stays the same. So if you want to have unshakable confidence and unshakable foundation, then you have to base that in what's eternal and unchanging. And the only thing that's unchanging in this world of change, if you look around you, everything changes and everything decays, basically. The only unchanging is the foundation of spirit, is that spiritual foundation. And if you base your identity in this identity of spirit, that you are spirit, that you are the one Christ itself within you that you have, and these things become revealed to you through meditation and through other practices. But if you base your identity in that unchanging self, then no matter what changes, you eternally don't change. So you're unshaken by the changes in the world. And if someone insults some characteristic about your physical makeup, it doesn't bother you as much, because you know your true identity as that essential self, as that true self, as that Christ, as that spirit being within. So another saying, from the book I love, A Course in Miracles, is, I am not a body, I am free, for I am still as God created me. And this always resonated with me because my last name is a body. And I always saw it as like a, and then the word body. So a body. So this line, I am not a body, it was almost humorous to me, because it's like, you're literally not a body, but you're also like not like your PJ a body. You're not even that. And you are still as God created you, and all of us are that way. So the essential self of us is unchanging and never changes. So regardless of what's happened to you in life and how life has turned out, you are still as God created you, which is innocent, which is loved, which is pure, which is unchanging and unadulterated by life. And there's no blemishes on your spirit and on the face of the essential spirit that you are, who is loved, who's worthy, and who's cared for, and who is innocent and perfect and pure. So that's still as God created you, and you are still that. And so when you base your identity in that, that is unchanging. And so therefore you will never be changed in your confidence and in basing your life in that truth. So that's how this very non-spiritual, secular lesson in the book Supercommunicators by Charles Duhigg became spiritual for me, because the moment I heard that lesson, I was like, oh my God, like, this is what all the spiritual traditions, in a sense, have been trying to point us to, is to realize that you are a spiritual being having a physical experience. They're trying to point you to that. And more importantly, they're trying to help you experience that. And a lot of people who have had spiritual, psychological experiences of just recognizing that, like in an experiential way, they are always and forever changed after that, because they now know their identity is actually something bigger than that. And I believe all these spiritual traditions, all the true spiritual traditions in life, are trying to point us towards and guide us towards that personal experience for ourselves. Because once you have that experience, that you are not a body, you are free, and you are still as God created you, that you are different than this physical body, this physical identity, you're something bigger than that, you are forever changed after you have that personal experience. And I believe all the spiritual traditions are trying to guide us towards having that own personal experience for ourselves, because you're forever changed after that. And you hear this in a lot of people who have had psychedelic experiences where they experience that truth about themselves, or through meditation, or through prayer, or through other life-changing events, or whatever it may be, or through just reading the Bible, whatever it may be, that became the doorway for them to experience their essential self. They were forever changed by that revelation, and so will you, and so will anyone who ever experiences that. And I believe the spiritual traditions were trying to guide us towards that. So
a direct experience of the transcendent is enough to shake you to the foundation and to destabilize not only you, but your culture.
Anyways, that's how this whole point became spiritual for me. and I saw it through that lens. And I honestly felt like it was a very beautiful point to end the book on, and honestly end this video on, because, you know, if you resonate with that, then I love that. I'm so glad that you resonate with that spiritual part. I might have, you know, lost some people or lose some people over that little section at the end, but nonetheless, that's how I saw it, and I have to be truthful to how I saw it, and it might be very helpful for some. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please check out the book. The link is in my description of the video. It's an affiliate link, so if you buy it, I will get some commission from Amazon. I hope to see you guys in my next video, which will be probably another book recommendation / book review / book summary video. So I hope to see you guys there, and until then, take care, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.